School bully picks on a girl just because she's black, but he never expected what she would. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching this video from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Enjoy the story, everyone. The fluorescent lights of Westfield High's main hallway flickered as students parted like the Red Sea. Ethan Reeves strutted down the corridor, his 6-foot frame casting shadows over the freshmen who pressed themselves against lockers to avoid catching his attention. The 17-year-old's reputation preceded him like a toxic cloud. 3 years as Westfield's undisputed alpha, the boy who'd made teachers reconsider their career choices and students memorize alternative routes to class. "What are you looking at, Pipsqueak?" Ethan snarled at a sophomore who'd maintained eye contact a millisecond too long. The younger boy mumbled an apology and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan smirked, the familiar rush of power flooding his veins. Nate Winters, Ethan's faithful shadow since 7th grade, chuckled beside him. "Man, I swear they get more pathetic every year." Ethan's kingdom was built on calculated intimidation, a strategy that had protected him for years. Nobody at Westfield knew about the quiet 10-year-old he'd once been, the boy who'd walked home from elementary school with tears streaking his cheeks after the older kids had surrounded him, mocked his second-hand clothes, and pushed him face first into mud. Nobody knew how he'd sworn that day, shivering and humiliated, that he would never be vulnerable again. "Heard we're getting fresh meat today," Nate said, scrolling through his phone. "Some transfer student." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Better learn the rules fast." The warning bell rang and students scattered to their classes. In Ms. Dawson's psychology classroom, Ethan slouched in his back row throne, ignoring the lesson on defense mechanisms. The irony was lost on him as Miss E. Dawson explained how people developed shields to protect their wounded selves. Projection, displacement, and intimidation are all ways people avoid confronting their own pain, she explained, her eyes lingering momentarily on Ethan. He scowled back, but something in her knowing gaze made him shift uncomfortably. Ms. Dawson had always looked at him as if reading a book nobody else could see. The classroom door opened, and Principal Bennett appeared with a student Ethan had never seen before. The girl stood with her shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, not in arrogance, but with quiet self-assurance that immediately irritated him. "Sorry to interrupt," the principal said. "This is Imani Carter joining us from Chicago. Please make her feel welcome at Westfield." Imani's dark skin seemed to glow under the classroom lights, her braids adorned with subtle gold cuffs. But it was her eyes that caught Ethan's attention, sharp, perceptive, and utterly unafraid, as they swept across the room and briefly met his. "We're discussing psychological defense mechanisms," Ms. Dawson said warmly. "Find any seat, Imani." The only available desk was 2 rows ahead of Ethan. As Imani walked toward it, whispers rippled through the classroom. New students were rare at Westfield, especially mid-semester. "As I was saying, Ms. Dawson continued, we build these walls to protect ourselves, but eventually they can become prisons." Ethan noticed how intently Imani listened, nodding occasionally, as if Ms. Dawson was confirming something she already knew. When the teacher asked for examples of defensive behavior, Imani's hand rose confidently. "Sometimes the people who act the strongest are carrying the heaviest burdens," she said, her voice carrying a melodic quality that commanded attention. "They attack before they can be attacked." A strange chill crawled up Ethan's spine. For a fleeting second he felt exposed, as if this girl had somehow peered through his carefully constructed armor. By lunchtime, Imani had become the topic of whispered conversations throughout Westfield High. She carried herself differently from other new students. No anxious glances, no desperate attempts to blend in. When she entered the cafeteria, conversation momentarily dimmed as curious eyes tracked her movements. Ethan watched from his claimed corner table as she navigated the social minefield with effortless grace, declining invitations from various cliques to sit alone by a window. Something about her self-sufficiency grated against his nerves like sandpaper. "Looks like Queen Darkness thinks she's too good for everyone," Nate remarked, nodding toward Imani. Ethan's jaw tightened. New students were supposed to be scared, disoriented, easy targets. But Imani's calm confidence suggested she wasn't playing by the established rules. Worse, he'd noticed how people looked at her, with curiosity rather than fear. It threatened the carefully calibrated ecosystem of Westfield High, with Ethan firmly at the top. "Time for a proper welcome," he declared, standing up. The cafeteria sensed the shift in atmosphere immediately. Conversations faltered as Ethan crossed the room, Nate and a few other followers trailing behind him like remoras attached to a shark. Students' eyes darted between Ethan and his apparent target, anticipation building. Imani continued eating her lunch, seemingly oblivious to the approaching storm. But as Ethan reached her table, she looked up, not with surprise, but with what appeared to be expectation. "Well, well," Ethan drawled, planting his hands on her table. "Looks like nobody told the new girl how things work around here." Imani placed her fork down carefully. "And how do things work exactly?" Her calm response threw him momentarily. Most students stammered or averted their eyes when confronted. Recovering quickly, Ethan leaned closer. "Rule number 1, you don't act like you own the place when you've been here for 5 minutes." The cafeteria had gone completely silent. From the staff table, Ms. Dawson watched intently, poised to intervene but waiting. "Is there a waiting period before I'm allowed to exist comfortably?" Imani asked, genuine curiosity in her tone rather than defiance. Laughter rippled through the cafeteria, heating Ethan's face. Being made to look foolish was intolerable. "Listen, you ugly black weirdo," he hissed, voice dropping to ensure teachers couldn't hear the slur. "You need to learn your place." He expected tears, anger, or embarrassment, the typical responses to his targeted cruelty. Instead, Imani smiled. Not a nervous smile, but one that reached her knowing eyes. "Are you sure you want to continue down this path?" she asked quietly. "Because in about 10 seconds, you're going to regret it." A murmur swept through the onlookers. No one had ever spoken to Ethan Reeves like that. "Is that a threat?" he demanded, anger masking his growing unease. Imani stood, unexpectedly diminishing the height advantage Ethan had been using to intimidate her. "It's an opportunity," she replied. "An opportunity to stop being the person everyone fears and start being the person you actually want to be." Before Ethan could respond, she leaned forward and whispered in his ear, words meant only for him. "I know about the boy who was pushed into the mud and called worthless. I know how it felt to swallow those tears and promise never to be weak again. I know you, Ethan Reeves." Ethan jerked back as if electrocuted, blood draining from his face. It was impossible. Nobody knew that story. He'd never told anyone, not even Nate. "How did you—" he began, but Imani wasn't finished. "Behind this bully is a broken boy," she said, voice audible now to those nearest. "And that's okay. We're all broken in some way." The cafeteria had gone so quiet that the distant sound of traffic outside seemed deafening. Ms. Dawson had risen from her seat, moving closer but still observing. Ethan stood frozen in the cafeteria's spotlight, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. Students whispered, phones recorded, but all he could focus on was the impossible knowledge Imani possessed. His chest constricted with the familiar panic he hadn't felt since that day 7 years ago. "How could you possibly know that?" he demanded, voice barely audible. Imani's expression softened. "Because I see people, Ethan. Not the masks they wear, but who they really are." "Ms. Dawson approached, her presence commanding respect from even the most rebellious students. "Everything all right here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she'd been anticipating this confrontation. "Just introducing myself to our new classmate," Ethan managed, struggling to regain his composure. Ms. Dawson's gaze moved between them. "Imani, would you mind helping me with something in my classroom?" "Ethan, I'd like you to join us after you've finished your lunch." As Imani followed the teacher out, the vacuum of their departure filled quickly with speculative chatter. Nate grabbed Ethan's shoulder. "Dude, what did that freak say to you? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ethan shrugged off his hand. "Nothing, she's just weird." "You're letting her walk away. Since when does Ethan Reeves back down?" Nate challenged, confused by this departure from script. Something about Nate's entitled tone, so similar to his own usual manner, struck Ethan like a slap. For the first time, he heard how they sounded to others, saw the ugliness of what they'd been doing. It was as if Imani had handed him a mirror he couldn't look away from. "Maybe I don't want to waste my time," Ethan muttered, gathering his things. Nate blocked his path. "You're not serious. You're going to let some random new girl disrespect you. What's next? Apologizing to all the losers you've put in their place." The cafeteria had grown quiet again, students sensing another dramatic scene unfolding. Ethan felt dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see if the king would reclaim his throne or abdicate. "Get out of my way, Nate. Not until you explain what's happening. We've worked too hard building our rep to let it get trashed in one day." The word "we" hung in the air, suddenly hollow. What had they built, really? A kingdom of fear where they ruled over resentful subjects? Some legacy. "There is no we in this," Ethan said finally. "I'm done." He brushed past a stunned Nate and walked out of the cafeteria, ignoring the explosion of conversation that erupted behind him. Instead of heading to Ms. Dawson's classroom, he pushed through the school's double doors into the crisp Oklahoma autumn. For 20 minutes, Ethan sat on the bleachers overlooking Westfield's empty football field, thoughts churning like whitewater rapids. He'd spent years becoming someone he thought was untouchable, only to be completely undone by a few whispered words from a stranger. The metal door to the field clanged open. Ms. Dawson approached, taking a seat beside him with comfortable familiarity. "Imani told me she might have been too direct with you," she said without preamble. Ethan gave a bitter laugh. "You think? She has an unusual gift for seeing past people's defenses. It can be uncomfortable." "How did she know?" Ethan asked, the question that had been burning since the cafeteria confrontation. "About what happened when I was 10. Ms. Dawson considered her words carefully. "She didn't. Not specifically. But she recognized the pattern. She's seen it before. In Chicago. In herself." Ethan turned to look at his teacher, surprise momentarily overtaking his anger. "Before moving here, Imani was bullied severely at her previous school," Ms. Dawson explained. "But instead of becoming like her tormentors, she studied them. She wanted to understand why people hurt others." "And what brilliant conclusion did she reach about me?" Ethan asked, defensive edge returning to his voice. "That you're not a monster, Ethan. You're a survivor who chose the wrong way to heal." "That you're not a monster, Ethan. You're a survivor who chose the wrong way to heal." The words settled between them like seeds finding soil. Ethan stared at the football field, processing what Ms. Dawson had said. "So what now?" he finally asked. "I've spent years being someone everyone hates. I can't just wake up tomorrow and be different." "No, you can't," Ms. Dawson agreed. "Change isn't overnight, but it is possible, one small choice at a time." The next day, Ethan returned to school braced for the fallout. Word of his confrontation with Imani had spread throughout Westfield like wildfire. As he walked the hallways alone, his former entourage had quickly realigned with Nate, who eagerly stepped into the power vacuum. Students still gave Ethan a wide berth, but now it was confusion rather than fear that colored their expressions. Wednesday morning, he arrived at his locker to find someone had scrawled "weak" across it in black marker. He stared at the word, once his greatest fear, and felt strangely unmoved. He'd spent years running from that label, only to discover that facing it wasn't nearly as devastating as he'd imagined. "Want help cleaning that off?" He turned to find Imani standing nearby, offering a packet of wet wipes. "Why would you help me?" he asked, accepting them nonetheless. "Same reason I called you out," she replied, "because I think you're worth it." As they worked together to remove the graffiti, Ethan noticed students watching with undisguised interest. "You're not making yourself popular by associating with me," he warned. Imani shrugged. "I've never been particularly interested in popularity." In psychology class that afternoon, Ms. Dawson announced a partner project on resiliency and trauma. When she paired Ethan with Imani, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. After class, she asked them both to stay behind. "I have a proposition," she said once they were alone. "Westfield has needed a peer support program for years. I think you two could be instrumental in starting one." Ethan frowned. "Why would anyone want support from me? I'm the problem they'd be discussing." "Which makes you uniquely qualified to help solve it," Ms. Dawson countered. "Redemption isn't just about stopping harmful behavior, Ethan. It's about making amends." Over the following weeks, Ethan and Imani worked on their resiliency project, gradually expanding it into a framework for the peer support program Ms. Dawson had suggested. Their unlikely partnership became a fascination for the student body, especially when they presented their work to the class, with Ethan speaking openly about his transformation from victim to bully to someone struggling to find a healthier identity. Nate and his newly formed crew made several attempts to provoke Ethan back into his old ways. "You're letting her walk all over you," Nate challenged him in the hallway one day. Since when does Ethan Reeves become someone's charity project? The words that once would have triggered his rage now seemed childish and transparent. Maybe I'm tired of being feared, Ethan replied calmly. Maybe there's more to life than that. 6 months later, Westfield High's auditorium filled with students and faculty for a special assembly introducing the school's new peer support initiative. Principal Bennett invited the program's founders to share some thoughts. As Ethan approached the microphone, the auditorium fell silent. Many still remembered the Ethan Reeves who had terrorized these halls, but the young man who stood before them now carried himself differently. "A year ago, I thought strength meant making others fear me," he began. "I was wrong. True strength is having the courage to face your own pain, instead of inflicting it on others." Afterward, walking home under Oklahoma's vast sky, Ethan reflected on the strange alchemy that had turned his deepest shame into his greatest strength. He'd spent years trying to outrun the frightened boy he'd once been, only to discover that acknowledging that boy's pain was the key to becoming someone he could actually be proud of. A text from Imani lit up his phone. "First meeting of summer break tomorrow at the library?" He smiled as he replied, "Wouldn't miss it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. We hope Ethan and Imani's journey of transformation touched your heart." If their story about breaking cycles of pain and finding strength in vulnerability resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to life. Every day, we share new emotional stories that explore the complexity of human experiences, so feel free to explore our channel for more content that speaks to you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you relate to Ethan's struggle to overcome his past? Were you inspired by Imani's empathy? Share your reflections in the comments below. Join us tomorrow for another unforgettable story that will move you, challenge you, and perhaps even change your perspective. Until then,